burnout is so real. Burnout seems to be an epidemic in Western culture. And I'm just thinking about people listening today. If you're on the verge of burnout, you're not alone. If you're experiencing full-blown burnout, you're not alone. Burnout is no longer the experience of a few. Burnout has become the experience of the majority in our culture.
Yeah.
And I am really, really excited to have this conversation because there's a lot of people that are listening to this podcast or these videos that are in the midst of either, on the verge of burnout or you're living the full-blown experience. So I'd love to start this conversation with what is burnout? Help people to understand kind of a picture of what it means to be burnt out because it's a term used so much. Let's really hone in and identify what it means.
The simplest form or definition that I would say is emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that comes from prolonged periods of stress that we're not supposed to experience.
Yeah. I like to say that burnout occurs when you get stuck in an unhealthy stress cycle. And that stress over time leads to a place of burnout. I love this definition. Burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. Exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Your definition was better.
Probably got the same
It was
source.
amazing. And the term burnout was coined in 1974. So it's not a new term, although it's really popular. A psychologist was overseeing a group of volunteers in New York City, and he saw them lose motivation and enter into this state of emotional depletion as they were carrying on in their people-to-people work. And I think what's really interesting about the idea of burnout is it's a metaphor. And it pictures a person who has energy and investment and passion like a fire burning inside for whatever work they're doing or relationship they're in. And over time, through stress, that is depleted, where literally their energy is sapped. They lose the passion inside of themselves for what they once did. I've seen so many pastors enter into burnout and say, I don't even want to pastor anymore.
Yep.
10 to 20 years prior to that, they were locked in.
Right.
They were so fired up to do that work inside their heart. Or think of weddings that you've done as a pastor or premarital counseling where a couple is so passionate and alive in their relationship. And then they get to a state of burnout in their relationship where they're like, I'm done, hit the eject button, I'm out. And I think that's a really good picture of what burnout is. I was listening to a really well-known expert on burnout, and he said burnout occurs primarily in two areas. One, relationship stress cycles that are unhealthy over time. And two, vocational stress cycles that are unhealthy over time. And that burnout could be factoring into, kind of the external circumstance of like what this is doing to me. It also could be factoring into how I'm processing the stresses around my job. Have I learned to carry the weight in a healthy way? So I think all of those kind of ideas I feel like are helpful in understanding burnout. Would you guys add anything to kind of the definition and description?
I would say how insidious the component of it is in that it's not like you wake up one day and you're like, I'm burned out. It's over time in ways that are so subtle that you don't realize adjustments you make that contribute to your burnout. So I give an example of our connection to our devices. And I think before we were talking about the alerts that come up on our phone. And how I can think for myself, my work email comes up on my cell phone so that where I am, I get an alert when an email comes in. Well, all of a sudden, my brain, no matter where I am, there's this cross-contamination. I hate to use the word contamination of the environment where I can't purely be present because now I'm aware that there is something that is pending that I need to attend to. And so it's where your work environment, your relationship overlaps with times that are supposed to be purely, on your own or
Vacation.
spiritual or vacation, things like that. There's overlap in that. And it's subtle.
Yeah, it's, the thought that came to mind for me, as cheesy as it is it quite literally is a slow burn.
Yes.
And so sometimes we don't even realize it. It's that metaphor of, the frog being in a boiling pot of water, but it's happening so slowly, the frog doesn't realize it's getting boiled alive. Sounds really intense, but I think that meets the intensity of the experience for many of us. Any of us who've experienced burnout know how painful it is, how discouraging it is, and how often it's not just the burnout we're feeling. We're also feeling the shame and the guilt as a part of it. And I think that's where, there's a model for burnout that I've found helpful. And this model includes 3 main experiences as someone is having burnout or heading towards burnout. And one is just the exhaustion that we've all talked about. Mental, emotional, physical exhaustion. Maybe you're just working crazy hours. And then the next piece is depersonalization. And that's this piece where you may notice yourself all of a sudden getting frustrated with the people you're caring for, or not feeling as compassionate as you did before, not being as patient as you were, not being willing to go the extra mile that normally you would love to go for the person you're working with or working for, and accompanying that maybe some guilt of what's happening. Like, I used to love this work. This was important for me. Like, where is my caring going? It's like I'm running out of care, and I'm not doing it intentionally. And then that last piece is a decrease in personal accomplishment that a lot of people also feel that loss and shame around, because they'll notice I'm coming in for just as many hours, I'm working as hard as I can, and I'm just less effective. I'm having a hard time focusing. I'm not getting as many things done. I have the same amount of work, but it's like I only got through half of it. And I think all 3 of those components perhaps can give us some compassion for ourselves and awareness if we may be experiencing burnout.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful in understanding the nuances of burnout. I think because burnout is related primarily to stress, it's really important to understand the anatomy of stress. So when you think about stress, there's a stress situation, then a stress response, which we all feel. And then after the stress response, in a healthy way, our body calms. We go back to homeostasis, kind of a baseline level. But some people, they never hit that. There's something in their life that continues to incite that stress, where it becomes a cycle over and over and over and over again. And I think it's really important to identify that we're not meant to live in that state. I think you mentioned on a previous episode of how when we're in that continuum of stress, it affects us on every level. Like stress-related diseases, emotionally, mentally affects us, relationally affects us, how we react and respond to people and things, how we begin to view the world and our world. And I think that's really important to understand when it comes to burnout is what is that cycle of stress in our lives that is leading us on this constant cycle? Like what's inciting that stress in our life? I thought it'd be really valuable also to add some stats, like just to normalize it. Here's some stats. Recent studies on burnout in our culture. 84% of millennials say they've experienced burnout in their current job. That's from one source. Another source says 70% of people experienced burnout in the last year. This is during the kind of the pandemic era. 84% of Gen Z report burnout, which is interesting, right? 33% of employees and executives are struggling with fatigue and poor mental health in another article. And then 68% of employees and 81% of C-suite, which would be like higher level, say that improving their well-being is more important than advancing their career. Which is like, oh my goodness. Like I've hit a place in my life where I'm unhealthy. And it's affecting me deeply, that I would rather be well than make more money, have a higher title or position in the company. And this is an interesting one in 2021, which makes sense. 38% of pastors consider quitting full-time ministry. They're just burnt out. And all of that is related around stress from some sort of angle or facet. What about our own stories of burnout? I think this is important to contribute to the conversation.
100%. I mean, 2020 was a time of a lot of stress, a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, a lot of trying to figure things out. And when you add those factors on to how do I even do my job and I'm inventing new ways to do my job, of course, we're going to see burnout in people's lives. I'm no different than that, right? Like, we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with our lives. What are we supposed to do? And so there was no time where your brain was calm and at rest, at least for me, right? So during that time period, I was in that statistic of pastors thinking about quitting, in fact, figuring out something else to do. Like, man, I'll just go do another job. I'll figure out something else. I got a counseling degree. Maybe I'll just be a counselor. And really, thankfully, I was able to push through. And sometimes you don't need to quit your job. You just need a break from your job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, sometimes
that's
you
great.
don't need to resign. You just need to rest. And I think finding
good.
proper rhythms of rest can keep you in the game a little bit longer. And thankfully, I was in a place where I was able to do that, to get some rest, to step back for a little while. Because it's inevitable. If you run at a high rate of speed, it's like a car running in red. It's going to break down at some point.
And I also think with the pandemic, people worked from home, which I love work from home. So please don't, get a different message from that. But what happened is your home environment became where you did your work. It became where you ate. It became where you interacted with your family. It became the place where you're supposed to be resting. So this one physical spot represented so much, whereas before you were able to compartmentalize that. When I walk through the door, I can leave this behind, and then now I'm on to this.
Yes.
But now there's all of this, I am using the word again, overlap, where at home is also the place where you do all these things. Or what happens when at work, that's where you have your social environment. That's your community as well. So if there are relationships that are strained at work for personal reasons or professional reasons, how does that impact your work as well? So because of all of this overlap, it complicates these environments, and we're not able to compartmentalize and have sacred sanctuaries for rest.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yep.
Yeah. What came to mind for me was, during 2020, everyone's boundaries were kind of rearranged. And they didn't have an expectation for what life would become. And so, with all of life happening at home, the natural boundaries that were in place were all of a sudden gone. And boundaries are there to protect us. They protect our time for rest and our rhythms of rest. They protect our time with the activities and the people that we value deeply, that refuel us and revive us. When those boundaries are taken away, we're all left vulnerable to burnout. And I can think back on my own personal experience of that, where unfortunately, it wasn't that my boundaries were taken away. It's that I never really established firm ones. And it was in grad school for me. And, we've talked about pastors, helping professions. I know mental health professionals absolutely have very high rates of burnout because the work is beautiful, meaningful, also comes with a cost because you're hearing about painful situations. And I'll never forget being in a room, it was group supervision, and realizing on my way there, I had dreaded going into work, into a job that I love. Like, it is the greatest honor to be a hearer of people's stories, to witness their growth. I love this job. And I felt such immense guilt and shame, realizing I just drove this whole way here thinking, can I call in sick? Can I call in sick? I don't know how I'm going to do this. I literally don't know how I'm going to make it through 8 hours. And just being shocked at myself. And then we'll call it God's providence. I come in and sit down in group supervision. And the first thing my group supervisor does is says, you know what, we're going to practice something called self-assessment. It's where we check in with ourselves and notice the different areas of our lives. Notice how much responsibility are we carrying? How much emotional, cognitive energy do we have right now? And it was so simple. She got me to literally take a paper plate and to just go through each area of my life and write down my responsibilities. And I looked down at it with tears in my eyes and realized I have not stopped to look at the massive amount of things on my plate I didn't even know. I didn't even know how I needed to rearrange and resteward my time, how I needed to create boundaries that would protect my marriage, that would protect my 8 hours of sleep, that would protect my time to relax, my rhythms of rest, so that I could protect this deep love and care that I have to be a psychologist. And I share that story hopefully to normalize that for anyone who's listening, that, sometimes until we take a moment to stop and to assess what we're actually carrying each day, we don't realize what boundaries we need.
Yeah, that resonates with an experience I had just a few days ago. So I had an appointment with a naturopathic doctor. I wanted to get started with that. And she was just like interviewing me and getting information and why do you want to do this? And I was just saying, I don't know if it's my age, but like I'm just sleepy all the time, but I don't know why I'm sleepy. Like I just find myself like physically being exhausted in the middle of the day. I've never been a napper. And she said, we're probably going to have to check your adrenal glands to see what's going on. So I didn't know what that meant. So of course I Googled like, what is the adrenal gland and what happens around there? And lo and behold, cortisol, stress hormones. And she was talking about how like there could be that associated. And that hit me because I was thinking, I don't feel stressed. I didn't know that I was stressed like this to where I could be overproducing this cortisol that's making me lethargic all day long. And then when I sat for a second and I thought, what's everything that I do? And I'm like, whoa, I'm juggling 3 different jobs in a day while putting food in the crock pot, while managing, okay, I got to pick up this kid and take up to dance or something after, like all these things. And I'm like, wow, I'm probably having a stress response, but not even realizing that my body is saying, sometimes your body is telling you you're stressed out before you're consciously aware that it's happening. And then I want to make another point to what you were talking about with helping professionals. So you're thinking about church leaders, therapists, people who care about people and care for people. There's a term called vicarious trauma, which is listening to these difficult stories of what people are experiencing, their traumatic experiences or distressful experiences. We're human beings. We're affected by that. We take that in. And over time, that becomes our secondary stress. And that contributes to burnout as well, because we're starting to carry other people's burdens with us.
Yes. That's so true. And we can all relate to that.
I was going to say, I think there's some things from just culture that can create burnout as well. In many communities, there's this like, hey, I'm team no sleep. Hey, I hustle all the time.
Yeah.
And I think those things had in good intentions. Like, right, we want to produce, we want to get things done. But if you don't sleep and you're hustling all the time, you're going to die.
You're in trouble.
It's inevitable. Like nobody has the ability to run at 100 decibels all the time. And just think about the story of God in creation. What did he do on the 7th day? He rested. And so rest has to be a part of all of our rhythms. Because, I mean, even if God had to do it, you better do it as well. I know we're not jumping into the theological part as well. But when you see, even in the life of Jesus, a pastor pointed out at one point in time, you never see Jesus run anywhere. He always walked. He was always on his own time schedule.
Picture.
People tapping him on the shoulder. Hey, come heal my daughter. I'll be there in 3 days. And I love that Jesus did that to set this example of like, I'm not going to be in a hurry just because it's an emergency for you. Yeah. I'm going to take my time and I'm going to get there because I understand what I have to do while I'm on my way. And I think so many times culture can speak these messages to us. We're achievers. We want to hustle. We want to grind. We don't want to sleep. But you're going to be dead if you don't.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
We're hurried. We're stressed.
Yeah.
We've had this narrative form us that hustle culture equals success.
Right.
Yeah.
And the stats say people that are successful don't want to be more successful. They want to be well.
Listen to that.
Like,
And
listen to that.
That should tell us something, right? And here's the thing. People who achieve great things are the ones who experience burnout because it does take hard work.
Takes a toll.
It takes a toll, but you have to have a strategy for rest. God gave it to us. He talked about a Sabbath being a part of something that we needed to do. And I guarantee you, well, I don't want to say that. That's a simplification. But I would venture to say that there's no one who takes a true Sabbath, a day off of not doing work, that is burned out. If you every 7 days was in your rhythm, you probably wouldn't experience burnout. And I can just use that from example from my own life. The times where I'm running all the time without any days off, that's when burnout comes.
Yeah. Well, like all of you, burnout is a part of my story. I remember year 3 to 5 of my church plant, not only experiencing debilitating anxiety, but the thing that I once was so passionate about, so invested in, I felt less energy, less passion. It got to the point where I was just like, I'm done. I want to quit. I don't want to do this anymore because I'm not feeling well. Some of those statistical things were true in my life. And at a point of hopelessness, I reached out to one of my mentors, Wayne Cordero, who wrote the book that leaders in the Christian space use for burnout because he experienced it. So he wrote a book called Leading on Empty. And basically, it was a book that told his story and it shared all the things that helped him to re-engineer his life. So I met with him, sat in his living room for hours, told him all that I was going through and experiencing. And he said, Wesley, you are burned out. And if you keep going at this pace, the long-term ramifications, just physically in your health are going to be permanent. You have to stop now. And he invited me to Hawaii. We went on sabbatical in Hawaii, which was awesome. That's where his church was.
That
Church of
works.
14,000 people in Oahu.
Beautiful.
Spent a whole summer thinking, how did I get here? And then what can I do never to get here again? Like, how can I re-engineer my life so that I could be healthy and whole with the set of responsibilities that God has given me to be well within that? Like, I think for me, like, I was so young, so much ambition. I was running at a sprint pace, but I needed to learn to run the marathon. I was sprinting everywhere. I was doing everything for everybody. He sat me down, and one of the things that really struck me that I never forget is he said, people love you so much that they're going to kill you.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
People want you to so be a part of everything in their life that there's a pull that unless you create some sort of healthy boundaries, that you're not a robot, you can't do everything for everyone all the time. You can do something for someone, but you can't do everything for everyone. And if you try to do that, you're going to be ended by this reality in a way. Like, in other words, this is going to prevent you from long-term in a healthy, flourishing way, do what you feel like you're called and wired to do. And so in that re-engineering process, I thought about what do we do in life to create space to be well rather than living in a continual state of burnout? What are practices that helped you, help me? I'd love for us to share those.
Let me give just two practical ones. The first is the people who you are serving will never set boundaries for you. You have to set boundaries for yourself.
That's so good.
Children, if you want, you could serve them all the time. Your kids will never say, you know what, Mom, you look tired. Or you know what, Dad, you look exhausted. And that is true for anybody who's serving a community of people. They will never set boundaries for you. So you have to set boundaries for yourself. And along with that, this one is kind of harsh, but whatever. You are not the savior of the world.
Yes.
You're not. I had a pastor that used to say it to us this way, not the kindest thing to say, not the most therapeutic thing to say, but I'll put on my pastor hat to say it. He would talk about how people thought they were so important they wouldn't call off work, wouldn't take a day off, and he would say this, I dare you to die. I dare you to die. In other words, he was making the point that if you died, the things that you think won't keep going will keep going.
Wow.
Not therapeutic, but true.
That's brilliant.
If something happened to me, people are showing up to church next week and they're going to figure it out without me.
Yeah.
And the same is true for you and whatever you do.
Can I add a connection to what you just
Sure.
said? You're not the savior. Jesus was a savior. Full schedule, full set of responsibilities.
Yeah.
Demand for healing, teaching, everything. He was a polarizing religious figure, so he had stress from like the people that were opposed to him, and then he had needs from the people that followed him, and he kept healthy rhythms and boundaries.
Yeah.
Listen to this. There's a verse in the book of Luke that says this, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and pray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Often, which means he disconnected from the crowds, the demands, the needs, because he knew that he needed to fill back up. He needed to rest spiritually, emotionally, mentally at a soul level and replenish himself in quietness and prayer. So if Jesus was the Savior and he did that in his life on earth, how much more so do we need to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just a brilliant observation. Here's a couple others, and I think this is in the life of Jesus, just margin.
Yes.
Margin is a communication that we are not God. And margin is a communication that we have limitations and human needs that we need to fill, because some of us are living in a way that we think we are like you said, we think that we are more important or needed than we really are.
And you are important. Don't get me wrong. Just not as
True.
important as you think.
Yes, exactly. So I think margin is really important.
Talk about margin a little bit. What do you mean by margin? What's a practical example of
Yeah,
margin?
I think one area of margin is just creating rhythms of rest, right? Like I think sleep is a daily rest.
Very important.
Yeah.
Sabbath is a weekly rest. I've learned that a monthly disconnect is really important. So like carving out a day once a month to be intentional around like, okay, how am I doing spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, and relationally? Just kind of like an assessment. And to take a day to recharge as much as possible. So like a daily rest, a weekly Sabbath, a monthly disconnect, and then a yearly vacation. That's just a time to just enjoy life and fill up your tank in an intentional way, taking a week away or 2 weeks away. Now, some people can't do that.
Right.
So I think we have to think of
Yeah.
the people that may not be in that same context of life where they are privileged enough to go away for a week or two
Right.
or what have you. I think they can still carve out some rhythms of rest in their life where they can intentionally say, hey, you know, like right now I might have 2 hours once a week where I can fill up my tank. I can do something that is bringing life to me and that is refilling some spaces and places in me that are emptied. I always try to think of those people, you know, that don't have that privilege.
Right.
Because I think that's a real thing. I grew up
Yes.
with a mom who was grinding all the time.
Yeah.
Just to
Put food on the
put food
table.
on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, you know, discount that experience for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, I think may not be able to have it as structured as you want, but everybody can find some time in their schedule. That's the point that we're making. Find some time in your weekly schedule to do something that fills you up.
Even a daily 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, then that's an
life-giving.
accomplishment on its own. Yeah.
So I want to jump into kind of theological things about this or some things from scripture to talk about burnout. One is Moses and Jethro, familiar story from Exodus, I think 17 or 18. Moses is helping everybody's disputes. Everybody is dealing with things and they're bringing it to Moses, and Jethro stops him and says, this is not going to be good for you. You need to figure out another way to care for people. And I think Moses is an example of what burnout looks like, but Jethro kind of gives him a formula. Hey, don't stop caring for these people, but figure out a better way to do it. And I think whenever our life is leading us toward burnout, we should listen to voices around us that have some wisdom around us trying to handle the issues that we're dealing with. Again, Jesus,
So good.
the passage that you shared, he got to a place and then got away to pray, to get away from the crowd.
Yeah.
It makes me think of also, you know, the people who are going to be listening to this podcast, we're talking about experiencing burnout, but also if you're a leader, how are you contributing to burnout in your environment
Right.
unknowingly? That there's momentum. We talk about momentum going in places and it's electric, and you see people are energized and are excited, and then there's this purpose around something, and then all of a sudden what you don't realize is you are starting to reduce or blur boundaries, and there's communication with one another 24/7 at any point in time, and your intention was not to burn out, but you could be fostering an environment that does burn out. So I would say having some humility to really do an audit of how could I be contributing to the burnout of the people I'm supposed to be leading and caring
So
for.
good. There's a book called Margin, and in the book, the author is trying to assess like what's led to the state that we're in and how do we create margin. And that's one of the points he makes. He says, in our culture, progress is so highly valued. So every organization, you know, wants to make progress. But he said we need to start assessing that how progress is adding to stress, because all progress adds an extra layer of stress and pressure on any system, on people in that system, and it also adds complexity. So I think that's really, really valuable point to add to this discussion is not only like how can we be well, but then how can we
Protect
help
others.
others be well?
Yeah.
There's a cost to progress.
Yes.
So I think that's really good. I think about, you know, theologically what you're talking about, the life of Jesus. And this is how how I put it. Jesus broke away so that he didn't break. And I think we need to learn to break away so that we don't break.
Yeah.
So margin is
Absolutely.
one of those, but also intentional changes in our life. Like part of the burnout story for me is not just a reflection, but a re-engineering of life. And one of the things that I realized is I was for years living in a depleted state. It was unhealthy. And I had to say, okay, God, I have so much output in my life. I'm making progress. I'm achieving stuff. I'm doing stuff. I'm partaking in this incredible opportunity, vocation that you've given me on so many levels. The things that I did, I loved, and I still do, but I didn't have a lot of input. So the way I think of input is this. Input is essentially an investment into our well-being so that our body and soul can flourish as we carry out our responsibilities. So what investments do we have? And here's how I kind of categorized it for me. I made an assessment. I said, I have a mental tank, an emotional tank, a spiritual tank, a physical tank, and a relational tank. Of those tanks, which one empties the fastest? Where do I feel depleted the fastest? How am I counteracting that with intentional investment? Like what fills that tank back up? So for example, like my emotional tank, I learned that of every other area of my life as a category, that emptied the fastest. I also realized that I thought I was an extrovert, but I'm actually a borderline introvert. And because I'm wired like that, and this might look different for everybody, because I'm wired like that, I needed time away on a consistent basis, just even small chunks of time intentionally being alone to fill back up emotionally. So I went through and I assessed all of those areas of my life.
awesome,
And I
man.
said, how can I not only identify where those are being depleted, but also add input so that I can fill those back up? And I don't want to give all the examples because what happens with leaders is you hear all these examples and you're like, oh, I'm just going to replicate that.
Right.
I think the important thing is to answer those questions for yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Because you're not me and I'm not you. And say, okay, what is emptying fast and how can I fill this up? Another thing that I learned was a major warning alarm for me was when my mental tank got empty, because it doesn't get empty quick.
Yeah.
Like I normally am doing well mentally. I can constantly be researching, reading, learning, studying. When it empties, that's the alarm bell that I'm really in a bad
Yeah.
space and place. So I think really having a self-evaluation process over each areas of your life and learning to be intentional in investing those areas is so vital.
That assessment that you just did is so brilliant. You should put that on the Better Days website.
It already is.
Boom.
Right on. Right
All right.
on.
Yes.
Awesome.
So
That's
it's
good.
called,
so people can answer that for themselves.
I don't even know the article. It's called Healing from Burnout.
There we go.
And
All right.
I
Check
just
it out.
personally shared what I learned.
Love it.
Any other thoughts around that?
Yeah, what I was thinking is one, I agree with the assessment, so valuable. And I appreciate how you individualize it too, because for each person, self assessment might look a little bit different.
Yeah.
But it's how we catch ourselves during the slow burn rather than realizing, oh, I'm completely burnt out. There's
Right.
nothing left.
Right.
So it's so valuable. I know for me, what I've done over the years is similar areas of life, but I've done something called like weekly pages where I just journal at the end of the week and am noticing like thoughts, feelings, motivations that's coming up. And for me, also recognizing my warning signs. If I find myself feeling less compassionate about activities and opportunities that I'm deeply passionate about, that's a big warning sign for me, that compassion fatigue. If I notice that I'm wanting to cancel plans with friends when one of my highest values is my relationship, big warning sign for me. And then, of course, exhaustion is the third big warning sign for me. So I wonder if, each of us and the people who are listening, it may be helpful, a starting point, just learn your warning signs. And if you're not sure what they are, you might be able to ask your partner, best friend, a family member. They might be able to help you identify when they notice they're worried about you. And I think the other framework I use is this idea that both theologically and I guess psychologically, I see my life as one that is limited, also one that is gifted, meaning every time I practice boundaries or self-assessment or self-care, it's an acknowledgement that God is God and I am not. I, like Jason said, I'm not the savior of the world. And I'm so grateful to acknowledge that God is God and I am not, which means I have to own my humanity and think about, in God's goodness, what has God given me or gifted me to steward? And maybe it's people I'm leading, and I'm mindful of the way that I'm leading. Maybe it is my emotional well-being. Maybe it's my mental well-being. Maybe it's my relationships. Maybe it's my physical health, all of these pieces of self-assessment. But I found that is really motivating for me when I think through self-care is not being self-focused or selfish. It's actually stewarding what God has given me so I can continue to approach the work of ushering in the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven from a wholehearted place.
So well said. I love that, Casey.
Thanks, Wes.
Self-care is not selfish. Self-care is stewarding. Brilliant. I actually wrote that down this morning on something. So the fact that you said that, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm right in my thinking because you're the expert.
Our brains are connected.
Yeah, I think the last thing, and obviously this is a really pragmatic topic to talk about, because like, how do we go from burnout to in what we're doing? I think a couple of things. One is because burnout is related to stress, what are some healthy stress coping mechanisms? There's unhealthy ones. They're just going to add to what's going on. But what are some healthy stress coping mechanisms that people can practice as they're engaging with stress? And there's two lanes here, because burnout is not just vocational, it's also relational. So I'd love to hear, maybe you could take some relational ones and you could take some vocational ones, and I can add a few as well.
I think, as a prerequisite to that, it's prioritizing doing those rather than doing what you think needs to be done. And then if I have time, then I'm going to do these practices. Instead, think about a calendar that you fill in with work meetings. What would happen if you first filled in with whatever time you want to carve out, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of, this is for me to use in whatever capacity I need for rest or rejuvenation or whatever, and then fill in after the fact and have that been, even if it's like a electronic or whatever calendar that you share with other people, where that's already blackened out so nobody can add meetings to that. So doing that first, I think that's important. Okay, so now getting to the relational aspect of it in setting clear boundaries. And this goes along the lines of Jason's point of like, you're not the savior. You're not everything to your partner, your spouse, your friend. You're not everything to them. You contribute and enhance a part of their lives, a part of that relationship, but the fundamental needs of a relationship, that also involves being able to have a communal experience that the relationship has, that there are outside sources that resource the relationship as well. And so I think we burn ourselves out when we think that we are responsible for fully resourcing our relationships. So I think it's sitting with, whether it's a friendship or your spouse or whoever, to say, okay, what are the fundamental needs that we have as a couple? What are the fundamental needs we have as individuals? And where can we get that from? And how can we support each other to make sure that we alert each other if we're not going out to do that? Because I think the natural inclination is, let me just go to the person who's closest to me in proximity and expect it from them.
That's so well said.
Yeah.
Yes. And, thinking about the vocational side of that, I think we mentioned this earlier, but oftentimes in our vocations, we experience double the stress, meaning on the one hand, there's the stress of the jobs that are on our plate to perform. Maybe we have a lot of responsibilities. Maybe we are leading. Maybe there are many meetings we actually have to go to. And that's truly a heavy load on our plates that causes stress, understandably so. But oftentimes there's this secondary stress that pops up too. And that is the expectations and the stories we are telling about ourselves about all of the responsibilities we're holding. So imagine a world where I'm walking into work every day, and on the one hand, I have these very real stressors, all of my meetings, all the clients I'm meeting with, all of the ways that I'm creating or resourcing people, all of my responsibilities. And on top of all of that, I'm thinking to myself all day long, it's not good enough. I'm never going to get it done. I probably have to do this a second time because it's not meeting the part. They're not going to like that. That didn't actually help that person. And on top of the stress, I'm also experiencing the emotional distress and discomfort of my own inner self-criticism and high expectations I'm setting for myself. So I think that is often a starting point. Getting curious about what are the ways in which I talk to myself throughout the workday? And is the relationship I have with myself something that is making my work more manageable, more enjoyable, where I feel more free and wholehearted? Or is it shutting me down, making me fearful of my activities or dreadful towards them? And that's a space we can invite God into too. When we're noticing those thoughts, we can pray about those thoughts, share those with God, share those with a therapist, share those with others, and allow others to help us manage the way that we actually think about and process our work lives. And then there's the practical piece too of, setting a work schedule if you have the ability to do so that allows for rhythms in life like sleep, that allows for rhythms in life like meeting with the people you love deeply who fill you up, that allows for rhythms in life where you can engage other pieces of yourself that you value. So for me, I want to be able to do yoga if it's possible. I want to have the time and space to go on a walk in between clients sometimes. I know for me that allows me to come back to my next session from a wholehearted place where I'm not exhausted. For each of us, that might look and feel a little bit different. And then I think the last piece is each person's going to be different. I think it's important to take breaks in work.
No doubt.
To take breaks in your work day, and your work rhythm's going to look different. So it might take some experimentation and discovery. So be curious, discover.
As you're talking, I'm wondering about leaders. Like, what examples are we setting? Just like Jesus set the example for us by having Sabbath and walking, not running. But when we show up to work sick, we say, I feel terrible, excuse me guys, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to grind this out. When everybody knows we're on vacation, we're still sending emails or after hours. Even though we're thinking this is a choice that we're making in ourselves, the message that we are unintentionally sending to the employees is, I expect you not to cast aside any time that you're not staying connected to that.
It's really good, Stephanie.
So really going against the grain of, if you want to not only for yourself, but to send a message to others that it's okay if you're sick to stay home and not plug in.
That's so good.
It's beautiful.
I mean, I even think of just the intentionality of how we're living our life on like a daily basis in the workplace. Like our weekly lunch, not only is it disconnecting from work, but hanging out with you fills up my tank. I feel well, I feel refilled. And just a great picture is we can't thrive on empty.
Right.
No.
Like our car's going to run out of gas. You and I talk about this. I drive on E all the time.
Me too.
He tells me that you do too.
You live on the wild side.
You have to fill your tank back up to keep going. And I think a couple of things that you two mentioned is just awareness. Like, how did I get here? What's going on in my life? What are the contributing factors internally and externally? And then intentionality. How do I intentionally build out my calendar? Or how do I intentionally put these inputs into my life that I'm filling back up this tank that gets empty? And it's normal. We all have stressors. We all have challenges. We all have burdens. We all have progress and responsibility and all the things that we do. But if we can be more aware and more intentional, we can actually be well and flourish in the things that are a part of our life. And if we don't, if we don't care about ourselves, and if we don't manage ourselves well, we will not flourish in the things that we are engaged in won't flourish. So we have a choice. Do we want flourishing, awareness, investment, or do we want to be contributing to our consistent state of burnout where we don't become aware and we don't become intentional? I think everybody would choose the former rather than the latter.
Yes.
And so let's be well. Let's do as much as we can to invest into our well-being so that the responsibilities that God has given us are carried out in a way that we create flourishing and we feel flourishing inside of us.
That's great.
It's beautiful.
Great to have this chat with you guys. This is actually one of our longer podcasts, but it's because it's such an important topic, and appreciate all your thoughts and your wisdom around this topic. There are better days ahead for people that are burnt out. It's not a destination, it's a place you're at, but there's hope for change.
It's good.
Fantastic.